Thank you, Skip. It's great to be here. It's always somewhat of an emotional period as I think about this gathering every year, and I think about when my wife Lori and I went and visited with the head of urology oncology at one of the world's leading centers. And after reviewing my slides and my condition, I asked him what treatment he would recommend. And he told Lori and I, he suggested that I get a psychiatrist, get my affairs in order, and we get a psychologist for our children. I told him I appreciated his great insight, but I thought we might do a few things first. And so when I think about that, coming here, it's been a long journey. It's been a long journey for many of you, and I can't thank you enough for your effort and the team that Dr. Holden spoke about, and that early visit to the young Dr. Simon and Bill Nelson, who's here at Hopkins, and others, or visiting with Dave Heber, who I think has made every single retreat at the Center for Human Nutrition. So I am very excited, and I don't know if this is going to work or not, but we're going to try to see if we can forward this. So first, I'm happy in talking to many of you, similar to Noah, that you've decided to come to the retreat this year. And when I think about this area, I just think about what happened if I compare this with 1993. We really had three parts, and I'm so excited that we've added NBAs to the list of people that we invite so that I can join you every year. And when I step back and just look at where we are in 2019 and listening to Dr. Simon's words here of just what this means, not just to prostate cancer, and not just what this means to cancer, but what these meetings mean to every single person on the planet. And so I thought I'd break my talk into a few parts. First, prostate cancer and the national pastime. So when we have these meetings, they're generally set at the same time as the World Series in the United States, and I know we have more than 100 people from outside the United States here, but this is a sport that's popular during a period of time in the United States. And it's particularly of interest this year because Washington Nationals are in the World Series. But we embraced this idea with Reverend Greer and myself. It just started with two of us, with the idea of keep Dad in the game. And this coming year will be the 25th year that we've gone to ballparks all over America, raised considerable money, and Chris Evanson and Felicia, or Neil and Youngblood, and so many have joined us. Joe Torrey has joined us at so many parks, and Whoopi Goldberg and Stuart Raw, and the list goes on and on. We've been particularly interested in recruiting women and the 400 and some odd broadcasters over the years. One of the most effective things we did was focused on how we could reach the individual, and with our board member Steve Bird's leadership, we mobilized the team at Safeway and at 1,700 stores around the country. We raised money, average donation under $2, and here you had two of the great baggers in the history of Safeway, myself and Tommy Lasorda. But one of the exciting things on this tour, and one year we went to all 30 ballparks in 20 days, was meeting children and their participation and decoration in what we did. And so, as I said, there's a lot of excitement today because Washington is in the World Series for the first time since 1933. They won. They were first in war, They were first in peace and last in the American League since then, or the National League. So what's interesting today is when you think back, they did win a World Series. That team left, but some of the talent they had, many people thought these were the names from the Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. No, but they were Muddy and Slim and Doc and Pinky and Chick and Bucky and Goose. This was the talent that you won't find in the Hall of Fame, but you will find on the 1924 World Series champions. Now, like many challenges in life, things always don't start out well. They lost their best player, who decided to join the Phillies. Next, they had the fourth worst record in baseball at the end of May. The press pointed out the season is over for the Washington Nationals. The manager doesn't work, and they made that announcement in May. In September, they won a wild card, and they're in the World Series, and they're up 2-1. And they built that in many ways the way we've built the Prostate Cancer Foundation over the years, with draft picks that starred for them. And when you look at Houston, they did the same thing. They started out with the worst record in baseball for a number of years, only to continue to improve, and in the last 3 years, collectively have the best record in baseball and won the World Series a couple years ago today, and they did it the same way. Draft picks that became stars by identifying young talent and then adding some seasoned veterans or mentors. So they've been interested in investing in human capital the same as we have. So our focus, as Skip pointed out, was trying to attract the best and brightest to the field. And the very first slide I had put up in '93 was this slide of a formula which I had written at Berkeley in 1965. And that was the world's most important asset, the productivity of individuals, which is measured in hundreds of trillions, needs access to financial capital. And a simple idea was, if a researcher was spending half their time raising capital for your ideas, I mentioned to Jonathan and Bill and others around the country, I've got a better idea. Why don't you spend far less time raising money and let me work on that, and you can spend it in the laboratory. So just cutting your time from a half to a quarter increases by 50% of your time free to do what you do best. A close friend of mine that I began bonding with in the 1960s, Gary Becker, who won a Nobel Prize, actually for the concept of human capital in '92 that he had been working on since the mid-'60s. As most of you think of capital, means a bank account, a stock certificate, a factory. Not the capital we're talking about. It's schooling, computer training, courses, the talent of any individuals. And so many organizations want to be great, but they cannot field a team that allows them to be great. And so as we put out this challenge 26 years ago, it was that this century is going to be defined by a worldwide competition for human capital. And one of the very first slides I put up in '94 at Santa Barbara was this concept. One of the ways to do this, very simply, was, as I saw a submission to the NCI of 9 feet, took a year and a half to prepare it. The NCI was going to take a year and a half to review it. Even if it got a grant, it was 3 years after the idea started, and probably wasn't relevant, even though you had to execute what you'd suggested 3 years earlier. So the first effort is, how do you get the best people to want to work with you? Very simply, as you can see, Dr. Holden's stack that came in. You just let them know that it's okay to submit 9 feet, but we promise only to read the first 5 pages. So it's all right, okay? So, it's like you always wondered in elementary school, if you stuck a bunch of blank pages in the middle of your report to make it feel heavier, do they ever read them from that standpoint? But here, that was our promise, 5 pages. Next, you have to have no proof of concept. It could just be an idea. And lastly, we will let you know you won in 60 days and fund in 90. So Nobel Prize winners and everyone decided, boy, this was great. I could come up with an idea, I could explain it in a couple pages, and I'll know whether I get funded in a very short period of time. And it attracted a large group, diverse group of people to the field. I remember coming down here to San Diego with 2 of the most talented people in the country. One had been offered the job as the head of biology and the dean at Harvard. And I asked him, had he ever heard of Steven Spielberg? And of course he had. Then I asked him, do you know who runs Warner Brothers Films? He did not. And I told him, that's why you have to stay in the laboratory. If you want no one to ever know who you are, become the dean. If you do, stay and do your work. And the other individual, Howard might remember, was working on apples. And it took almost a week to explain to him that we could probably just eat the same apples for the next few years. Why doesn't he just concentrate on cancer research? But the group came to Washington. We recruited leaders. And as Skip said, getting people to be on the cover of a magazine, Andy Grove, explaining his story, or General Schwarzkopf, and bringing Andy and Judah Falkman, who now decided one of the keys for him was to focus on prostate cancer. But bringing donors, people that were patients, and scientists together in Lake Tahoe. Many of this group, whether it's Chris or others, are in the audience today, Ken, etc., Phil, so many years ago in Lake Tahoe. Going to Washington, D.C., and taking on a commitment. Our commitment was that we would work to double the funding of the National Cancer Institute, double the Institute of Medicine, NIH, and therefore that was our name, CAP Cure. CA, all forms of cancer, P, prostate, and lastly, cure for all life-threatening diseases, and that we were not a threat to reallocate capital, but to increase every single disease access to research. Senator Dole and others, visits to state capitals to get on the ballot, that you could, instead of getting a refund, sign that money off, in this case, to breast cancer and prostate cancer. Culminating event, as many of you participated, was 500,000 people in Washington and around the United States at every major cancer center in '98, and President Clinton signing into law shortly thereafter with the work of thousands, which has resulted just at the NIH in a cumulative $350 billion in financing. Beloved figures and leaders in their field, Arnold Palmer, Jimmy Connors, Quincy Jones, and Willie Nelson, all brought recognition to the work of prostate cancer and what we were doing. But there was a challenge. The increase in funding was stopping at the NIH, NCI, and other places, and we needed to launch a session which we held right during the PCF retreat in Lake Tahoe in 2011 called How Do We Innovate Innovations in Research? How can we accelerate once again? In this group, you can see here what then became the head of the NIH, Francis Collins, and the previous one, Zuhini, the head of the FDA, Lee Hood, who started with us, Chris Wiebacher, came together with a group of about 83 people half of which had nothing to do with medical science, but had revolutionized their own industries, whether it was Rupert Murdoch or Peter Ueberroth, etc., to figure out what we could do. And shortly, the conclusion was we needed a new center at the National Institute of Health called NCATS, the Center for Advancing Translational Science. And it was approved, and a $5 million investment resulted in a $6 billion commitment by the federal government within 90 days to this effort. To continue this movement, which eventually led in the 21st Century Cures Act, we put on the Celebration of Science. This was Senator Inouye, who, along with Senator Stevens, who had passed away at this point, but his wife, this was the last public appearance by Senator Inouye. He and Senator Stevens started the Department of Defense funding for the cancer program, which Dr. Sewell's been involved with since its inception, which has resulted in probably today more than $5 billion for cancer research and well over $1 billion just for prostate cancer. But as Howard kept telling me, you know, docs are cool. Okay, here is the gathering wearing Stuart Rahr's glasses at one of our events a number of years ago. In fact, they are so cool, we convened at the Kennedy Center the Rock Docs for their only performance in history at the Celebration of Science, and Chris Austin was the first head of the, and at this time the only head of the Center for Advancing Translational Science. But there are always naysayers, no matter what you do in life. And one of the things you learned in philanthropy, and I learned it at a very young age in the 1960s, is no good deed ever goes unpunished. So let's step back and look at what the New York Times, the source of all knowledge, tells us in 1987. Today, only about 500 genes, less than 1% of the total, have been decoded. Even a steady rise in this rate would have the job not finished to the 22nd century. I remember interviewing them and told them I thought they were a little pessimistic. But 93, when I was diagnosed, I was pretty excited about this article they wrote. No evidence exists to show that an aggressive effort to diagnose or treat prostate cancer has any effect on improving survival. I told them that was quite an optimistic outlook here, but stay tuned. Investing in innovation and young scientists. What the New York Times missed was technology and what was going to occur. And the cost of sequencing the genome dropped significantly. But investing in new ideas. Mark Simon is with us for the more than 20th time. And this slide came from Mark in 2000. There was Merck, which was the largest pharmaceutical company at the time, and there was this young company called Genentech. And it took 11 Genentechs to make one Merck. Well, and if we looked at what was and what the future was, in 2000, Merck was worth more than all the biotech companies put together. So if you added them all up, except the biotech companies, collectively were spending $8 billion at that time on research versus Merck less than $2 billion. Well, 6 years later, just one biotech company was worth more than Merck at that time. And so this investment in the future and risk-taking paid off. And one of the things I read, and we have used this slide before, is that the young don't know enough to be prudent, and therefore they attempt the impossible and achieve it generation after generation. And if we just look back at an individual who's been involved with this over the years, James Watson, he was only 25. Or Sir Isaac Newton, 23. And a Madame Curie who won 2 Nobel Prizes, was investigating her work at 30, and Galileo was in his early 20s. And Einstein was 26. and Jonas Salk was 30. And gosh, Bob Dylan was 20, and Quincy Jones was 18. And Magnus Carlsen, who did something it's almost impossible for me even to imagine, he now has the highest score of any player that's ever played chess in the history of the world. He still ranks below the computer today, but at 13, he had moved and became the '1 player. At our global conference a few years ago, he played 10 players blindfolded, who thought they were good in chess and beat them all. Just imagining, and a young woman who you might remember, Winter Vanecki, who lost her father to prostate cancer and went out and raised money, became the youngest person to compete in marathons on all continents. But what was going on at the NIH? Well, 10% of their funding used to be for people between 31 and 33. By 2006, it was down to 1%, and they were funding more people over 70 than under 40. But what had I learned beginning in the 70s and 80s about our funding of different scientists? 100% of every scientist, young scientist we had funded, received additional financing, additional awards, and additional discoveries. 7% of those at the peak of their career ever accomplished anything, so therefore we had to go against the NIH and focus on youth. And there was this young kid in Tahoe. We had to have a chaperone for him, Don Coffey, so he could report back in. And he wasn't allowed to be on his own after 10 o'clock at night. And Winter showed us all what a young teenager can do when she raised money, and with some match from our family, my wife Lori, Ilsa got a Young Investigator Award named after Winter shortly thereafter. And these young investigators, which got to be known as Dr. Sewell's flock, would meet periodically all over the world, and here they are in Lake Tahoe, enjoying the environment. But human capital, ideas, and talent is often evenly distributed around the world. So Shmuel Matar, who's here, myself, and Jonathan, pre his new nutrition program, went over to China, to start our Young Investigator program in China. And when we put on the celebration of science at the Kennedy Center, the Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi, sat 19 rows back. And the majority of the leader in the House, Eric Cantor, sat 19 rows back. And the majority leader in the Senate, Harry Reid, sat 19 rows back. And we wanted to make a statement for everyone that night. And the front rows at the Kennedy Center were all taken up by young scientists and young investigators. And we wanted to deliver not only a message to Washington, but to the world that our future was so dependent on them at that time. And as Jonathan put up the slide of the 284, this closes our third generation of young investigators, 284 in the third, as we begin our fourth generation. And here is a short video of a few of them speaking about what they've done and their focus on science and their career.
I decided to go into prostate cancer research because my father was affected with prostate cancer.
I really fell in love with the idea that I could be spending my days taking care of patients and being there in the most meaningful time in their lives.
Helping men get through prostate cancer treatment really feels incredible. It's why I became a doctor.
What I'm most proud of is that I'm part of a cutting-edge team that I believe will play a role in actually curing prostate cancer.
Knowing that what you do will have an impact on someone's life makes you really, really want to invest all your time in it.
What more fun can it be to be the first one at the bench to find something that nobody else has seen before?
Every therapy that's saving lives right now started with an experiment with a pipette, with some sort of thing at the lab bench. And so the investment in research, that leads right to new therapies and to saving patients' lives.
One patient that's actually still on apalutamide, and he was in the first phase 1 trial, and he came in with his wife. He had a very high PSA. He was very anxious. He took a leap of faith to take this first-in-man drug, and now, all these years later, he's still on study.
One of the ways that the PCF helps to move the needle forward in terms of research is their great ability to bring people together. And really the big breakthroughs, I think, in medicine have been the result of team science and being able to share your research ideas with other researchers and to work together.
This is an incredibly hopeful time for men with prostate cancer. Only in the past 5 years or so, there has just been an incredible explosion in the number of options for men with metastatic prostate cancer.
I think that there's been no foundation that has placed such an emphasis on high-end, cutting-edge research, and there's a very deep and basic understanding that research is the most valuable pursuit that can spawn cures.
The Prostate Cancer Foundation, they're improving lives of men with advanced disease. They're giving them hope, they're giving them options, they're advancing science, they're making it so patients like my patient who was on apalutamide can enjoy graduations and life events and take trips and see his grandchildren graduate from college.
And as you all know, behind every one of those YIs was a mentor, an organization, a university, an academic center. Technology, nutrition, and microbiome. We've gone for so many years against what conventional wisdom was. One of the heads of the NIH told me that we should not be focused on disease-specific efforts. We needed to understand basic research. And so I had asked him, are you telling me then that everyone who has a life-threatening disease, they should be sacrificed, we should let them die while you discover the truth, the ultimate truth to all science and medical? No area did we receive more resistance over the years than nutrition. And so I put this slide up only to remind you, if you go back to 1994 and you were with us, of a question here. The closest thing to a human, a chimpanzee, 98.4% the same DNA. They have substantially different diets. Our ancestors ate 800 different plants, and I think the average American probably eats less than 7. 20% of Americans don't eat their normally regulated suggested amounts, which come from a pyramid that was incorrect in the beginning. And so we put out this idea in a slide that I showed in 1994 that the pharmacy of the 21st century would be found at the produce section of your grocery store. But in 1994, there wasn't a lot of acceptance, even at the PCF called Camp Cure Group. And Dr. Holden, who with others was working on the program, let me know, since I had invited Dave Heber to join us in Santa Barbara in 1994, that there was no room on the program, and the program committee didn't want soft science interfering with the work of our retreats. So they allowed David to speak at lunch in 1994, and if you didn't want to listen to all that fluffy stuff on nutrition, just sit at a table farther away at lunch, or clink your glasses, and you won't be subjected to these unusual ideas. Bill Fair, who was head of urology oncology at Memorial, met David Heber for the first time in 1994. Bill himself later was diagnosed with cancer and passed away. But it forever changed his views on cancer and the outlook. And I have not put a picture up of one of Bill's colleagues, Howard Scher, to show you what Howard looked like in 1994 versus his sleek, trim Howard Scher version of 2019. We put up this slide in 94 and said, you know, it's interesting. Let's look at England over the last 45 years. And during a period of time, there was only 2 times in England where diabetes did not increase. And they were during World War I and World War II, because the citizens of the country were asked to sacrifice and eat fruit and vegetables during this period of time so the troops could have sugar and fat during that period of time. So there was a lot. And then in 1996, after we gave this in one of our reports, we put out our 17 strategies. And yes, number 13 was immunology and apoptosis and all these other areas, but number 1 was nutrition therapy, 1996. Then we put out cookbooks, so we were trying to get the scientists to think that we could fool you in what you're eating. And we brought kids into Lake Tahoe to our scientific retreat, and CNN, with a live shot, very dangerous, having kids use silken tofu in what they were eating and then getting their reactions. And Andy Grove became an advocate, as did Ted Stevens, and Beth Ginsburg, who joined us in 95, began to work on could we put together in recipes what we had learned in science. Now, a big skeptic was Jim Watson, but eventually we won him over. So if we step back and ask ourselves, what does financial markets think today about this idea? So here's 2 companies. 2 of the largest consumer companies in the world with food that goes into your body and products that you eat, drink, etc. One is Nestle and one is Kraft Heinz. Kraft Heinz has 2 of the most famous investors of all time who own half the company, Warren Buffett being one, and 3G out of Brazil. And you could see at this period of time, it took a little less than 2 Krafts to make one Nestle. But Nestle hired an individual, not from the company that I knew, but hired a person running Fresenius, a health company, and announced in 1997 that they're going to be a health company. The first reaction was extremely negative. First, they give you diabetes, and then they're going to treat you. They're going to launch a 360 effort at the company. So what did the CEO do? He shocked the world and announced he agreed to sell his candy business in the United States. Then he started buying health companies immediately. Today, you could not recognize or speak of Nestle and Kraft Heinz in the same sense. Kraft's value is around $35 billion and Nestle $340. So as an investor, you ask yourself, 2 companies, same industry, very large, what happened? One changed their product line and moved into health, and the other has very few products, if any, that are healthy for you once we can sequence you, and is struggling in today's market of what they're going to do. So, the company in the United States that put on the most sexist ads of any company in the United States, some would have thought they were better suited for adult movies, but went on the air, was a company called Carl's Jr. It was purchased by a firm called Apollo, which my younger son worked for, and he was the chairman of the board. And every time he came to our house, My wife, Lori, would rip into him for his sexist ads and ask him, what is he doing? And what would he tell us? And if you want to go online for your own interest, just go search Kate Upton and Carl's Jr. But he said his idea of a customer was a plumber, okay, who's a little overweight, hanging out of his jeans, and he wants to see an attractive girl with a giant hamburger. And that's who their customer is. And when their customer changes, they'll change their ads. So I want to show you the current Carl's Jr. ad.
Yeah, I've seen a lot out here in the West. But a juicy charbroiled burger with a patty made from plants? Only the folks at Carl's Jr. can pull out something that bold. All the legendary flavor, none of the meat. When the wagon of change comes, you ride along with it. The new Beyond Famous Star with cheese, only at Carl's Jr., where the food is the star.
From the most extreme to the most extreme. Obviously, they're reflecting what their customers think. A few years ago, we put out this virtuous circle, and the concept was healthy humans, healthy planet. And when you looked at the environmental movement, you discovered that 50% of the top 20 things that affected the environment on the planet related to food. And then the ultimate occurred. The fantastic team at the Prostate Cancer Foundation created the new periodic table. It's available to you if you want it. And obviously, we're going to start by convincing schools around the world that there's a new periodic table they have to print first. So what about taste? When you studied why people buy food, the number one factor is taste. So let's take a look at a recent test of an Impossible Burger, which we're not 100% sure it's totally healthy yet. But let's look at this taste test that occurred.
We conducted an experiment to evaluate how well Whopper fans know their beloved Whopper. The people you will see here are real people, and these are their real reactions.
I've probably eaten about 2 Whoppers a week for the last 20 years.
I love Whoppers. I've turned Burger King into a crime scene a time or two.
I absolutely love beef. Beef all the way.
If it's not beef, I don't want it. First bite, I would know the difference between beef and whatever else you have.
Little do they know, their Whopper patty was actually made from plants.
You're f***ing kidding me.
We're not, Grant.
Wait, plant-based? What are you talking about?
No animals, just plants.
Really?
This is a f***ing cow.
No f***ing cow.
Tastes like a Whopper.
Tastes like a Whopper.
Tastes like a beef burger.
It's made of f***ing beef right here. You see that? It's beef.
We swear, it's not beef.
That's impossible. It tasted just like a Whopper should taste.
Lies!
A patty with 0 milligrams of cholesterol, 17 grams of protein, 100% Whopper, and 0% beef. We know it's impossible to believe. The Impossible Whopper, only at Burger King in St. Louis.
I'm confused. I'm reevaluating my life.
And as more and more research has been done, looking at the incidence of immune disorders that have grown in the last 50 years, and how much is this due to the change in the microbiome, not just here, but around the world. And so this is an area that we will be focusing on as Jonathan and I head to Washington for the meeting on the Future of Health Summit with 1,000 people focused on these issues. We will also be focused at this summit on the PCF Veterans Health Initiative that Jonathan talked about as we try to roll it out throughout the country at this time. And we will also be announcing, under Christine Jones' leadership, the new partnership with the NBA. And so, as many of you know, African Americans have a substantially higher incidence of prostate cancer and death rate. And so, during African American History Month in February, we are launching, after a pilot last year in the NBA, a program on a cyst. And funds will be raised for every cyst as we focus this attention of our country and the world, and hopefully China too, on the NBA and Black History Month. Finally, the American dream. What is this dream? It never was called the American Dream until this book came out in 1931. It was a dream of a land in which the world should be better and richer and fuller for everyone, with opportunity to each according to ability and achievement. Jimmy Stewart, in It's a Wonderful Life, commented on this, and in a book we published called Portraits of the American Dream in 1988, wrote this: American Dream is about freedom and the fruits of freedom. It's not about America, it's an ideal that exists around the world. It's about opportunity, not for those lucky enough to be born gripping that silver spoon, but an opportunity for all. It's the chance to start with nothing but an idea, with hard work, and to see it happen. Equal opportunity based not on where you were born, where you went to school, who your parents are, your race or your religion, whether you're a man or a woman, and have access to capital. And when this was asked of Maya Angelou a few years ago in our efforts, this is how she described the American dream.
Over the rainbow, skies are blue.
What is dreamed in America is really no different from what is dreamed in Shanghai. It's the same dream dreamed in Cairo and Johannesburg. Everybody in the world wants a good job. Everybody in the world wants to be loved. Everybody who wants children wants healthy children, wants safe streets. Everybody wants to be able to count on good health care. Every living person. And everybody wants someplace, if he or she is religious, to propitiate God on Saturday or Sunday. And everybody wants a place to party on Saturday night. That is the dream. That is the dream.
Oh, why can't I?
It may be, in fact, utterly impossible to be successful without helping another person to become successful. I don't know, but I don't think one can be liberated without liberating somebody else. I don't think so. My concern is not just about surviving. I will not live at any cost. But my attempt is to do better than just survive, but to thrive. And to thrive with some passion, some compassion, some humor, and some style.
So we have many programs, not just our efforts here in YIs, and I just want to highlight one of them for you today that are focused on young individuals. It was our Milken Scholars Program. It started more than 30 years ago, and here we try to identify people at 16 or 17, particularly those that were first or second generation Americans, and how we could empower them and those from the lowest socioeconomic environment. And a dramatic group of almost 500. The largest group, about 20%, have gone to Harvard. The next largest is Stanford, Yale, Berkeley, Penn, and so on. They've come from over 40 countries, and their parents have come from 73 countries. And we meet with them periodically. And when you read the newspaper and you reflect on things, you don't always necessarily get how people feel. So this is part of an effort that some of you are filming here. We are focused on filming 10,000 people from every country in the world on what they think this concept of a chance, this dream to succeed on your ability is in their life. Here is 6 of those 500 that we'd interview, just a few seconds of those interviews.
I do believe there's something that is the American dream. It's the reason why this country continues to be the destination of choice all over the world. It's a reflection of a hope and an optimism, not just for oneself and have a better career or a better future, but even for the generations that follow.
My parents are from South Korea, so they came here without knowing anybody, without knowing the language, with literally $100 in between them. They used to work 7 days a week, all the weeks of the year. I think there was one day a year that they would take off, and really just to close the store that they owned a little bit early. So they had an incredible, very traditionally immigrant work ethic. It arose from this sense of needing to succeed and needing to be financially secure and stable, not just for themselves, but for me as well.
I was the first person in my family not just to go to college, but to become a physician, and then to become a specialist. I don't think that would have been possible in most countries. For someone to come from a family of nothing, to be able to graduate from the best medical school in the country. And now I'm the CEO and owner of multi-million-dollar companies. And I'm grateful for being able to do that in this country.
When it was time for my college admissions, and people were complaining how competitive it is, how hard it is to get into good schools, and my parents would always remind me in India it's about 100 times worse considering the population and the limited opportunities. There are more opportunities here still to this day. I don't think that this dream is uniquely American, but I am very fortunate for what America has given me.
For me, a lot of access to education really does define the American dream. It's not always about being smart. Sometimes it's about having a window opened and realize that there's something on the other side to strive for. And so I think that that's actually where the Milken Scholars Program is an amazing asset. I didn't expect to be involved 30 years later with a program from my high school, and yet my investment is real because the investment is in people.
It really is the aspiration of all human beings to better themselves. And I think that while this country may have afforded us so many opportunities, it's a dream which belongs to humanity. America really is the world's experiment. Ideas and people from all over the world and from all across time have come together here. And so I think that our country, for that reason, has such a great responsibility, because to whom much is given, much is expected.
So, a home for everyone, every person that has ever worked on a grant from the Prostate Cancer Foundation. We are giving birth here in Washington, D.C. So your children, your friends, your families, your colleagues can go and see your presentations sometime during the last 27 years, where you grew up, who you were, at this site across from the White House and the Treasury that we've been working on for 6 years. This was an important site. There were 2 Arc de Triomphes built in the world after World War I. One was built in Paris that still stands, and one was built outside this buildings that we have in Washington, D.C. that was later taken down. And so of the various pillars on medical research and health, we intend to feature every single person that has worked in this area to reduce death and suffering for all in the world in this building, both digitally, by data tagging, and physically if you want to go see. It will open in a couple years physically and in about 1.5 years digitally. Who else will be in this building? We're going to give you questions tonight, but who else will be in this building? Presidents will be in this building, in that 23 presidents, this was where they kept their safety deposit boxes, their files, their personal notes, including notes written by Abraham Lincoln and checks for his son's allowance. It was a number of years ago, a book was written. For America to bounce back from the blow, it has to overcome its wounded national pride. In Washington, there's more concern that the city has known since Pearl Harbor. I read these words at one of our scientific retreats in 1998. People were scared. Many had panic reactions. They were searching for someone or something to blame. There's a sudden feeling of crisis of confidence forcing the United States to change its priorities. This was not 9/11, but 1957 when Sputnik went up. And myself and others that were in elementary school, they launched duck and cover drills, because if you could put a little ball up around the world, obviously you could drop a nuclear bomb anywhere. And as many of you know, I had a long discussion with my teacher. She could not convince me if a nuclear bomb hit Hesby Street Elementary School that I would be safe under my desk. But we reached a compromise. She would not try to convince me, and I would no longer disrupt the class. But as I mentioned to you in 1998, more than 20 years ago, the Soviet Union thought this was their finest day. They were superior in science, but this was the day that the Soviet Union began to end, because it woke up the United States. It increased its defense budget. DARPA was formed so the United States would never be behind in science again. And NASA was formed, so a country that had a GDP 20 to 30 times the Soviet Union was awoken. They changed the rules. It was cool to be a physicist or a mathematician, to work in science or an engineer. Scholarships were offered to millions of children, of which I was potentially one of them. The President of the United States let us know we're going to go to the moon, not because it was easy, but because it was hard. And just 7 years later, we accomplished that. And as I think about a career that I might have followed in science that was generated by this event, Sputnik, and I did write a letter, some of you know, to the President of the United States in 1957, on telling him why I wanted to lead the space program. The fact that I was 11 should not have been a deterrent in picking me to lead that effort, since I had never missed a math or science program. But what struck me was how similar it was for Jonathan Simons as it was for me when Sputnik went up. When I was 5 years old, my father was given 18 months to live, similar to me. He was fortunate to receive excellent care, and years later was able to join me at my college graduation. Since childhood, I've considered researchers to be my heroes, just as I felt about scientists, mathematicians. I felt an obligation to do something to make people's lives better. That's why I dedicated my life and my research, that my sons would have to ask, what was prostate cancer? And so when I think today, in the last month, we've lost one of our directors who supported much of your work, David Koch. He loved scientists, he loved science, he was engineering, he was a leader in that area at MIT. This is just a small amount of the institutions that have benefited from David's philanthropy, as have many young investigators. And when I thought about Sputnik going up and Jonathan's note, I couldn't think really too much farther than Jim Allison, who was at Berkeley, where Lori and I went when I first met him in Santa Barbara in the mid-1990s. And he had a simple idea. His simple idea was your immune system was smarter than all of us. And something happened, and we needed to turn it back on or energize that immune system. And so as he traveled in these areas, in many ways, he was also a student that was influenced by Sputnik. As many of you know, there's a documentary traveling around on Jim today, but here's just a short thing noting how Jim was also affected by what occurred with Sputnik.
Hello. Hello, this is Adam Smith calling from the Nobel Prize in Stockholm. Is this Professor Allison?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
Many, many congratulations on the award of the Nobel Prize.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you so much. I don't know what to say. I'm just stunned.
It's really wonderful this morning to wake up. My son called me at 5:30 and was the first to let me know that I'd won this prize. I want to thank him and Pam Sharma, my partner in life and in science. We work together now trying to do something really good, I think, for people with cancer. And I believe there's an American dream, and I'm living it right now. I grew up in a little town called Alice, Texas, way down, about 30 miles to the Mexican border. I was growing up in the post-Sputnik era. You know, the Russians had launched the first satellite that went around the Earth, and there was this big feeling that America was behind technologically. And one of the things that they did that changed my life was the National Science Foundation sponsored this summer course for high school kids in biology. And I'd been thinking about being a scientist before that, but when I was in that, I was hooked. That was it. I knew exactly what I wanted to do. And what I wanted to do was have the world be a better place for my having been there. We showed that this pathway we had discovered was the first one that actually turns off the immune system, and that the tumors had a head start. If you can't get enough T cells developed in enough time to eliminate the tumor, then the tumor wins. That's why I thought, well, let's just keep the T cells going long enough to eliminate cancer. And it worked in mouse models. And everybody told me, oh, anybody can cure cancer in mice. And then they said, the immune system will never work. There were a lot of skepticism. The first patient I met that had been cured of melanoma with the drug I developed. She was diagnosed when she was 22 years old with metastatic melanoma with metastases in her lungs, her brain. So she was on one of the early trials and was treated, and her tumors all went away. And I met her when she was being checked up, and they said, your tumor's free. And that was a pretty strong moment. Anyway, so that meant more than anything, I think. We're curing patients now. The idea is to learn in detail how it works and bring these benefits to more patients. I still got a ways to go, but I've been able to do things that when I was a kid, I never dreamed I'd be able to do that. And I really don't know if I'd have done that if I'd grown up in some other country. I kind of doubt it, had to take advantage of the opportunities that America should offer for everybody.
So as most of you know, we were not successful in 11 or 12 years at the moment in prostate cancer, but we moved over to melanoma, and Dr. Simons and Dr. Sewell and myself helped launch, alongside the Blacks, the Melanoma Research Alliance, which is the largest funder of melanoma research in the world. And there isn't a day I don't think about had Jim's work been done decades earlier, would my father have lived longer, who died from melanoma. But we do have one very vivid example of a person that benefited from this work, and is President Carter, who received the benefits of those 12 years and efforts that we had spent with Jim here as we switched to melanoma. And it was at a weak moment when I was with Jim a couple years ago, and Pam, who was another one of our young investigators, that Pam told me Jim told her he loved her in 2004, I think, at the scientific retreat in Lake Tahoe. So there was obviously a lot more going on than I knew at our scientific retreats. But Dana is with us here, 2011 young investigator who we got to see in the video earlier today. But as we think about why we're here, the idea of a stage 4 patient surviving would not have been something that we would have been talking about a couple decades ago. So let's look at the interaction with Dana and Steve.
I was first diagnosed with cancer back in 2016. I went to see a urologist, I had a biopsy, and I was diagnosed with stage 4 prostate cancer.
To hear the word stage 4, it was devastating, and that whole future, that whole growing old together was now gone.
I determined this was a problem to be solved. My wife has been great about that. My kids have been very big supporters. They've always been there for me.
He spent weeks on end coming and doing his treatments and staying with me, and to see his physical appearance change was difficult.
The state-of-the-art treatment at that time was hormone therapy with 6 cycles of chemo. I went through that, and I handled it pretty well. My PSA at the end of the treatment and after I went back on the biclutamide was down to non-detectable. A little more than a year after we completed the chemo. Unfortunately, the CT scan came back with enlarged lymph nodes. The cancer was again active.
When we heard the news that the cancer had metastasized, Dana had looked at us and said, yeah, there's no treatment protocol, but that doesn't mean there's nothing we can do.
So we are constantly re-examining, reinventing, looking for other ways to treat cancer.
The University of Michigan put out a study. It looks like patients who have this marker CDK12 may benefit from immunotherapy. This drug, it's called pembrolizumab. The marketing name is Keytruda, and it's worked for other cancer. I was supposed to have my 4th treatment, September 14th, 2018. I went in the morning and, went through, the whole process. So I get there and I get in, and Chelsea, Dr. Rathkoff's nurse, comes in and says to me, Mr. Heisman, Dr. Rathkoff is very happy with you. Your scans came back, and they came back very good, and your treatment is working. You're having a very good response. So go forward and live your life.
We need groups like the Prostate Cancer Foundation and all of their donors who so generously give to fund these trials using drugs that aren't yet discovered, that haven't yet shown benefit.
They funded a study at the University of Michigan, must have written a proposal. A week before we were in there to talk to the doctor, something new had been found.
My goal, if I'm not already there, is to be one of the first prostate cancer stage 4 patients who can claim that they were cured. The Prostate Cancer Foundation saved my life. Dr. Rathkoff saved my life. My wife and my family saved my life. I'm the beneficiary of all that, and I'm the luckiest person in the world.
And I'm happy to report that Stephen is still in total remission from his cancer, and a promise that each of you have helped us make to become a reality. And Dana, thank you for being with us today. So as I said, these periods for me of these annual gatherings, because they kind of remind me of people that aren't here today, and what could have been, and what the doctors were suggesting for me. And just the amazing thing to be able to see your children grow up, see them get married, get to meet your grandchildren, is a gift that each of you has given me. And I can't thank you enough for that gift. And in closing, this is not a political statement. This video I'm going to show you in closing, it's a statement of why we started this foundation and why I started funding cancer in 1972. And it's one that 1 in 2 men, 1 in 3 women, with increases in China and Nigeria today, tripling in certain hormone cancers due to change in diet and lifestyle. but it's a burden that we can lift for the subsequent generation. And that is why we're here. And that is why we're happy that you picked this for your career. Cancer, maybe more than any other disease, has dramatically changed, as Dr. Holden pointed out. When I went to see my friend, Gordon Binder at Amgen in '93, I told Gordon, haven't got a lot of time, we need to ramp up our cancer research. He told me, Mike, I'm a public company. Show me more basic research and I'll respond. In '95, he called me to let me know there's been a sea change, and they're going to increase their funding for cancer research by $500 million a year. So I am here with you today, as are millions of others, because of your work. And this is, at the end, about family. It's about children. It's about grandchildren. And it's about getting a chance to live your life to see what you can produce. And here is a short video of a discussion I had with Vice President Biden just a couple years ago.
Probably every one of you have been touched one way or another, personally or a family member, by cancer. And it forces you to become a student of cancer. You want to solve the problem. You want to figure out, learn all you can about it. The only truly bipartisan issue left in Washington is cancer. With the leadership of some really good Republicans like Lamar Alexander of Tennessee and Upton, Congressman Upton, he took this 21st Century Cures Act. We passed it with 388 votes in the House and almost unanimously in the Senate. The Congress came together. There's a consensus out there that there are certain things government should be doing. The Cancer Moonshot generated a great deal of momentum, and there's new hope for those who face this terrible disease. We made significant progress building on the work of many of you have been at for a long, long time, like Mike, but we have yet to win. And so all of us involved are not going away. We got to continue this sense of the urgency of now, because all cancer patients want is time. Doc, can you just give me one more month? It's my first grandbaby. I want to be here. Doc, he's going to graduate. Can you get me by? It's about days. It's about months. It's not just about cures. It's about giving people, just giving people some hope.
So thank you for giving us all hope. Thank you very much.